Before we begin this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss amazing stories like this. 1. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the barriers, cameras ready. Among them stood Ambassador Chen Wei, a high-ranking diplomat from a wealthy nation, visiting London for important trade discussions. He had heard stories about the famous royal guards, soldiers who stood motionless for hours in their iconic red uniforms and tall bearskin hats. Many visitors tried to make these guards laugh or move, but they always failed. The guards were trained to remain completely still, no matter what happened around them. Ambassador Chen was not like most tourists. He carried himself with great pride and believed his important position meant he deserved special treatment wherever he went. His assistant walked beside him, holding an umbrella even though the sky was clear. Behind them, his security team kept a respectful distance. As they approached the guard post, Chen noticed a young guard standing at attention. The soldier's name was James Thornton, though nobody in the crowd knew this. James had been serving as a royal guard for 2 years, and he took his duty very seriously. Chen stopped directly in front of James, studying him with curious eyes. The other tourists stepped back, sensing something was about to happen. They raised their phones and cameras, ready to record. Chen smiled slightly, the kind of smile that suggested he had a plan. He had made a bet with his colleagues the night before. They had challenged him, saying nobody could break a royal guard's discipline. Chen accepted the challenge confidently. Believing his status and charm could accomplish what others could not, he began speaking to James in a loud voice, talking about his important position and the power he held in his country. James remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead. His face showed no emotion, no sign that he even heard the words. This was exactly as his training had taught him. But Chen did not give up. He stepped closer, now standing just inches from the guard. Some tourists gasped, knowing this was against the rules. Visitors were supposed to stay at least 3 feet away from the guards at all times. Chen raised his hand slowly and waved it in front of James's face. Still nothing. The guard's eyes did not even flicker. Chen then reached into his pocket and pulled out a golden coin from his country. He held it up, letting it catch the sunlight. He spoke again, this time in English mixed with his native language, suggesting that even a disciplined soldier might be interested in expensive gifts. The crowd around them grew larger. People whispered to each other, some feeling uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Others were simply curious about what would happen next. James felt his heart beating faster inside his chest. But his face remained calm. He had dealt with difficult tourists before, but something about this man's behavior felt different. It was not playful or innocent. There was a testing quality to it, almost disrespectful. Still, James knew his duty. He would not move, would not speak, would not react. His commanders had warned all guards about situations like this. The rules were clear and simple. No matter what happens, stand firm and maintain discipline. Ambassador Chen was growing frustrated. He had never failed at anything he set his mind to, and the silent guard before him seemed like an impossible puzzle. The crowd continued to watch, some now filming everything on their phones. Chen decided to change his approach. He began walking in circles around James, examining him from every angle like someone inspecting a statue in a museum. He made comments about the uniform, the hat, and even the guard's posture. His voice carried a mocking tone that made several tourists feel uncomfortable. One elderly, British woman in the crowd shook her head disapprovingly. She had lived in London her entire life and knew the guards deserved respect. She whispered to her husband that someone should stop this behavior, but nobody wanted to confront a foreign diplomat. Chen's assistant looked worried. He had worked for the ambassador for 5 years and recognized the signs. When Chen felt challenged, he became stubborn and sometimes made poor decisions. The assistant wanted to suggest they move on and continue their tours, but he knew Chen would not listen. Chen reached into his jacket and pulled out his diplomatic identification card. He held it up, first to James, then to the growing crowd. He announced his title and position, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. He seemed to believe this display of authority would somehow force a reaction from the guard. But James remained exactly as he had been, eyes forward, face expressionless. Inside his mind, James was thinking about his training. He remembered his first day at the academy, when the instructors explained what it meant to be a royal guard. It was not just about standing still. It was about representing something bigger than yourself. It was about honor, tradition, and duty. The situation was attracting attention from other guards as well. Two of James's fellow soldiers stood at nearby posts, and though they could not turn their heads to look, they were aware of what was happening. They felt proud of James for maintaining his discipline, but they also felt concerned. Situations like this could sometimes escalate in unexpected ways. Security officers stationed around the palace grounds also noticed the commotion. They began moving closer, ready to intervene if necessary, but waiting to see if the situation would resolve itself naturally. Chen made another move that shocked everyone watching. He stepped even closer to James, invading his personal space completely. He was now so close that James could hear the ambassador's breathing. Chen began speaking in a quieter voice, words meant only for the guard to hear. He questioned whether James was truly as disciplined as people claimed. He suggested that standing still was not real strength, that it was simply stubbornness and pride. These words were designed to provoke, to find the weak spot in the guard's mental armor. For the first time, something flickered in James's eyes. It was barely noticeable, just the slightest change in his gaze. Chen saw it and smiled, thinking he had finally broken through the guard's defenses. He prepared to make one final push, one last attempt to get a reaction. But what Chen did not understand was that the flicker in James's eyes was not weakness or anger, it was determination. James was reminding himself why he wore this uniform, why he had chosen this path, and what it meant to serve his country with honor. The tension in the courtyard was thick enough to cut with a knife. More tourists had gathered, creating a large semicircle around the scene. Some felt excited by the drama unfolding before them, while others felt deeply uncomfortable. A few had already posted videos online, and the footage was beginning to spread across social media. People around the world were starting to watch this confrontation between a powerful diplomat and a silent guard. Comments flooded in, most viewers expressing support for the guard and criticism of the ambassador's behavior. Chen reached out his hand, moving it toward James's uniform. Several people in the crowd gasped. This was crossing a serious line. The rules about not touching the guards were absolute and well known. Chen's fingers were inches away from the guard's jacket when suddenly James moved. But his movement was not what anyone expected. In one smooth, practiced motion, James executed a standard military maneuver. He took one precise step backward, turned 90 degrees, and stamped his foot on the ground with tremendous force. The sound echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot. The crowd jumped in surprise. Chen stumbled backward, startled by the sudden movement and the loud noise. His confident smile disappeared, replaced by confusion and embarrassment. James had not broken his discipline at all. What he had done was an official procedure the guards were trained to perform when someone violated the boundaries of respect. The stamp was both a warning and a reset. After completing the movement, James returned to his position of attention. Once again perfectly still, as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. The atmosphere in the courtyard shifted completely. The other guards, who had been watching from their positions, felt a surge of pride for their colleague. The security officers relaxed slightly, seeing that James had handled the situation properly. The tourists broke into spontaneous applause, clapping and cheering for the guard who had maintained his dignity and followed protocol perfectly. Even some of Chen's own security team looked impressed by the guard's professional response. Chen's face turned red. He had been made to look foolish in front of dozens of witnesses and countless people online. His assistant quickly moved to his side, whispering urgently that they should leave immediately. But Chen was trapped between his pride and his embarrassment. He wanted to save face somehow, to turn this situation around. He opened his mouth to speak again, perhaps to complain or to assert his authority once more. But before he could say anything, a new voice cut through the air. A senior British security officer approached the scene, his uniform marking him as someone with real authority. His name was Captain Richard Morrison, and he had been serving at the palace for over 20 years. He had seen many incidents involving tourists and guards, but this one required his immediate attention. Captain Morrison's face was calm but serious as he walked directly to Ambassador Chen. He greeted the ambassador with proper diplomatic courtesy, acknowledging his position and title. But his next words were firm and clear. He explained that while visitors were welcome at the palace, they were expected to follow the rules and show respect to the guards who protected this historic location. Captain Morrison spoke with the perfect balance of politeness and authority. He explained to Ambassador Chen that the guards were active military personnel, performing their duties, not tourist attractions or entertainment. He mentioned that approaching a guard too closely or attempting to touch them was against regulations for very good reasons. These soldiers were responsible for security, and their focus could not be compromised. The captain's words were professional, but everyone listening understood the underlying message. Chen had crossed a line, and his diplomatic status did not give him permission to disrespect British military personnel. Chen tried to defend his actions, claiming he meant no harm and was simply curious about the famous guards. He suggested that his cultural background meant he did not fully understand the local customs. Captain Morrison listened patiently, then responded with calm precision. He explained that respect for soldiers on duty was a universal principle, not a cultural difference. He also mentioned that similar rules existed in Chen's own country, where guards at important government buildings were treated with equal respect and distance. This comparison left Chen with no room to argue. The ambassador's assistant was now actively trying to guide Chen away from the scene. He reminded the ambassador of their scheduled meetings and suggested they were already running late. Several other tourists had stopped recording, sensing that the dramatic moment had passed. But the damage was already done. The videos that had been posted online were going viral. News outlets were picking up the story, and social media was filled with discussions about diplomatic behavior and military respect. Most comments supported the guard and criticized the ambassador's actions. James remained at his post throughout this entire exchange, maintaining his position perfectly. Inside, he felt a mixture of relief and continued focus. He was grateful that Captain Morrison had arrived to handle the situation, but he also knew his duty was not finished. He still had hours left in his shift, and he would complete it with the same discipline he had shown during the confrontation. The other guards watched as Chen and his group finally walked away from the courtyard. They felt proud of their fellow soldier and relieved that the incident had ended without escalating further. As the day continued, more visitors came to see the guards, but the atmosphere had changed. People approached with greater respect, keeping proper distances and speaking in quieter tones. Some tourists who had witnessed the incident told newcomers about what had happened, explaining why the guards deserved admiration and respect. The story spread through the crowd like ripples in a pond, creating a more thoughtful environment around the palace grounds. Children asked their parents questions about the guards, wanting to understand what it meant to serve with such dedication. Meanwhile, Ambassador Chen sat in his car as it drove away from the palace. His assistant remained silent, knowing this was not the time to speak. Chen stared out the window, replaying the incident in his mind. He had expected to win a simple bet and perhaps have an amusing story to tell at dinner parties. Instead, he had become the subject of international criticism. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues and officials, all asking about the viral videos. Chen realized that his moment of pride and stubbornness had created serious consequences that would follow him for a long time. By evening, the incident had become international news. Television programs showed the footage of the confrontation, with experts discussing diplomatic behavior and military protocol. Some commentators praised James for his professionalism and restraint. Others criticized Ambassador Chen for abusing his position and showing disrespect to a soldier performing his duty. The story resonated with people around the world because it touched on universal themes of respect, dignity, and proper behavior. Social media hashtags related to the incident trended for days, with millions of people sharing their opinions and similar stories. James finished his shift at the palace and returned to the barracks where he lived with other guards. His fellow soldiers greeted him with congratulations and support. They had all seen the videos and felt proud of how he had handled the difficult situation. The commander of the guard unit called James into his office for a private conversation. James worried he might face criticism for being involved in such a public incident. But instead, the commander praised his actions. He explained that James had followed every protocol perfectly, maintaining discipline while also protecting himself and the integrity of his position. The commander also warned James that he would likely receive significant media attention in the coming days. Reporters would want interviews, and the story would continue to spread. He advised James to remain professional, to avoid making public statements without approval, and to let the official channels handle any communication with the press. James understood and agreed. He had never wanted to be famous or to be the center of attention. He simply wanted to do his job with honor. And that had not changed, despite the unusual circumstances. Ambassador Chen faced a very different evening. He sat in his hotel suite, surrounded by advisors and diplomatic staff. His government had been contacted by British officials, and conversations were happening at the highest levels. While no formal complaint had been filed, the incident had created diplomatic awkwardness that needed to be addressed. Chen's colleagues suggested various approaches to manage the situation. Some recommended issuing a public apology, while others thought silence would be better, allowing the story to fade naturally with time. Chen struggled with his pride. Apologizing meant admitting he had been wrong. This was difficult for someone accustomed to being treated with constant deference. But he was also a skilled diplomat who understood the broader implications of his actions. The trade discussions he had come to London to negotiate were now complicated by this incident. British officials might be less willing to be flexible or generous in their terms. His own government might view him as a liability rather than an asset. The personal bet he had made with his colleagues now seemed incredibly foolish and childish. Late that night, Chen sat alone and watched the video of himself confronting the guard. He saw his own behavior through the eyes of millions of strangers, and for the first time, he felt genuine shame. He saw how his actions appeared arrogant and disrespectful. He noticed the discomfort of the people in the crowd, the patience of the young guard, and his own stubborn refusal to accept the boundaries being set. This moment of honest self-reflection marked a turning point for the ambassador. He realized that his position of power had made him forget basic principles of respect and humility that he had once valued. The next morning, Ambassador Chen made a decision that surprised everyone on his team. He announced that he wanted to return to Buckingham Palace, not as a tourist, but to formally apologize. His advisors tried to talk him out of it, worried that another visit might create more problems or attract additional media attention. But Chen was determined. He had spent the entire night thinking about his behavior, and he knew that a proper apology was necessary, not just for diplomatic reasons, but for his own conscience and character. Chen contacted British officials and requested a private meeting with the guard he had confronted. The request created confusion and discussion among British authorities. Such meetings were highly unusual and raised questions about protocol and security. But after careful consideration and consultation with military leadership, they agreed to arrange a brief meeting. They recognized that a genuine apology might help resolve the situation and even turn the negative incident into a positive example of accountability and growth. James was informed about the request and given the choice to accept or decline the meeting. He thought carefully about it. Part of him wanted to simply move on and forget the whole incident. But another part recognized that this might be an opportunity to promote understanding and demonstrate the values he believed in. He agreed to the meeting, which was scheduled to take place in a private office at the palace, away from public view and media cameras. When Chen and James met face-to-face in the quiet office, the atmosphere was completely different from their first encounter. Chen stood before the young guard without his usual entourage or displays of authority. He looked directly at James and began speaking with genuine humility. He apologized sincerely for his disrespectful behavior, acknowledging that his actions had been wrong regardless of his position or intentions. He explained that the incident had taught him an important lesson about the difference between authority and wisdom. Between power and respect, James listened carefully, maintaining his military bearing, but also showing his humanity. He thanked the ambassador for coming back and for the apology. He explained that he had simply been doing his duty, following the training and principles he had sworn to uphold. He did not express anger or resentment, only a quiet dignity that impressed everyone in the room. The two men shook hands, and in that simple gesture, they demonstrated something important about forgiveness, growth, and mutual respect. The meeting remained private for several days. But eventually, news of the apology leaked to the media. The public response was overwhelmingly positive. People who had criticized Chen for his original behavior now praised his courage in returning to apologize. The story evolved from a tale of disrespect into a more complex narrative about mistakes, accountability, and redemption. Educational institutions began using the incident as a teaching example in courses about leadership, cultural diplomacy, and personal integrity. James returned to his regular duties, grateful that the intense attention was finally fading. He continued serving as a royal guard with the same dedication he had always shown. The incident became part of his personal history, a moment that tested him and proved his strength of character. Years later, when training new guards, he would sometimes share the story, using it to teach about discipline, respect, and the importance of maintaining composure under pressure. Ambassador Chen completed his trade negotiations in London, and while the discussions were challenging, they ultimately resulted in agreements that benefited both nations. He returned to his own country with a changed perspective on leadership and diplomacy. The incident had humbled him in ways that years of success and advancement never could. He became known not just for his professional achievements, but also for his willingness to admit mistakes and learn from them. The golden coin he had once waved in front of the guard remained in his pocket as a reminder of the day he learned that true respect cannot be bought or demanded, but must be earned through one's actions and character.